All right, welcome to a deep dive that feels, well, less like opening a book and maybe more like watching a magic trick. One where you can't quite figure out how it happened, and maybe, just maybe, it's a little dangerous. We're looking at something today that our sources are saying is completely shaking things up in media, maybe even changing reality itself.
Yeah, sounds pretty dramatic when you put it like that.
It does. We've been digging into a whole stack of articles, discussions, all focused on this new AI platform called VO3. And our mission today really is to cut through the noise, figure out what VO3 actually is, what it can do, and importantly, why these sources are claiming its consequences are just so incredibly dramatic for Hollywood, for creators out there,
Yeah.
maybe like you, and yeah, even for how we understand what's real anymore. The language they're using is pretty stark, words like urgent, thought-provoking, and yeah, it definitely leans into alarming.
Well, what these sources seem to hammer home right away is that this isn't just like another small step for AI. They're using terms like quantum leap, which suggests, the tech hasn't just gotten a bit better, it's jumped into a whole new league, maybe much faster than people thought.
That's exactly the feeling I got reading these, like something fundamental just shifted. Okay, let's unpack this then. So, at its core, VO3. The sources describe it as a hyper-realistic AI video generation platform. But just saying video generation, I don't know, it feels like calling a rocket ship a fancy car. It doesn't quite capture it.
Right.
What makes it so staggering reading these articles is the fidelity. They keep emphasizing that every single element you see and hear, the visuals, the sound, the way dialogue is delivered, camera moves, the acting, even tiny little facial expressions, it's all generated by the AI.
From scratch.
Exactly. Not just mixing real things together. And this isn't just, a good deep fake. The sources are saying it genuinely blurs the line. You can't easily tell if it's human-made or artificial.
And that blurring, that's the absolute key, isn't it? The big breakthrough the sources point to is getting past that uncanny valley. For years, AI people looked, creepy, weird movements, robotic voices.
Yeah, just odd.
Right. VO3, they claim, has cracked that. The realism in the AI acting, the voices, it's uncanny in the opposite way. It's apparently so accurate, the inflections, the little nuances, the timing, that people actually struggle to tell it apart from a real person.
Wow. And the barrier to entry, it sounds like it's incredibly low. Sources say you can generate this really high-fidelity stuff with just simple text prompts.
Describe what you want, the AI makes it. That's the idea.
Let's trip it out.
Apparently so. But it's not just about making single short clips. The sources talk a lot about something called flow technology. This sounds like a core feature. It lets the AI media be continuous and editable.
Editable? How so?
Well, think about it like this. Older tools are maybe good for, short meme clips, isolated things. Flow technology lets users string these clips together, edit them, build them into longer formats. They specifically mention generating short films or narrative sequences.
New films?
Yeah, calling them multi-minute visual vignettes.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big technical step, moving AI from just a novelty into potentially a storytelling engine.
So it's not just making realistic seconds of video. It's making realistic minutes of sequenced, story-driven content, just from an idea you type in.
That seems to be the claim.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because the sources are just adamant. Reaching this level of realism with this flow and this accessibility, they say it fundamentally changes everything. How media is made, how we consume it.
Yeah.
And let's just get straight to probably the most provocative claim in these sources. They basically declare pretty bluntly that Hollywood is over.
Yeah, that's a huge statement.
Yeah.
But they do lay out an argument for it, and it really centers on that uncanny valley point we just talked about. They say, look, until VO3, AI stuff looked fake. You could spot it.
Right, easy to dismiss.
Exactly. But VO3 apparently removed that distinction, or is starting to.
And they frame this not just as, a challenge, but as an existential crisis for the traditional film industry.
Right. Because if you follow their logic, the tools that used to cost a fortune and need huge teams, directors, actors, cameras, editing suites, sound design, all that stuff is now potentially available to almost anyone with access to VO3 just by typing prompts.
Wow.
So the sources see this as this massive democratization. Suddenly making what they call compelling narrative content isn't just for the big players.
So wait, if literally anyone could potentially create a high-quality movie, or at least a really compelling scene just using this tool, does the traditional studio system, which is built around funding and organizing all that complexity, does it become, I don't know, obsolete?
Well, that's the threat model the sources are presenting, yeah. The whole value proposition of a studio changes dramatically if the basic act of producing the visuals and audio is suddenly open to everyone.
Hmm. This leads into some really fascinating kind of philosophical territory that the sources get into. They ask this question, everyone's a creator, but not really.
Yeah, it's a nuanced point they're making there. They suggest that even though the tools are becoming super accessible, most people might still just be passive consumers.
Yeah.
Like we scroll through TikTok or Instagram now. It doesn't automatically mean everyone's going to become a filmmaker overnight.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, they absolutely expect a distinct new creator class to emerge. Individuals, maybe small teams, who really dedicate themselves to mastering these AI tools, using them to make sophisticated, complex art and stories.
And related to that, they're predicting a boom in what they call new storytelling modes, specifically something they dub micro-entertainment.
Micro-entertainment. Yeah, it sounds like highly visual, often surreal mashups. Things designed to be consumed really quickly, almost like a snack.
Like Reels or TikToks, but generated.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
The sources give this really vivid example, like imagining Harry Potter versus Darth Vader on the Death Star, but generated with photorealistic quality. It's about these rapid, high-impact, maybe bizarre little narrative bits made for quick, casual viewing on the platforms we already use.
Harry Potter versus Darth Vader. Wow. Okay, let's pivot, though, because the sources describe something else as perhaps the most alarming concern. They state it pretty unequivocally. We are entering a post-reality era.
Yeah, this is where the conversation gets pretty serious. They explain the mechanism clearly with AI like VO3 making media that you just can't tell from reality. Anyone, anywhere can create incredibly convincing fake content, politically charged stuff, socially divisive stuff, and it looks completely real.
And the really chilling consequence they detail isn't just the creation of fakes. It's that it undermines trust in real media, too. They argue that even genuine footage of real events might increasingly get dismissed as AI fakes, just because something looks unusual or unexpected.
Exactly. And the sources cite a specific, quite disturbing example as their illustration of this. They mention a case involving conspiracy theories around a violent event at an Israeli embassy. Now, the sources report that in this specific instance, some viewers claimed the actual real footage of the event was AI generated.
Wait, they thought the real footage was fake. Why?
They pointed to perceived off behavior in the video. Things that looked unusual to them became proof it must be fake. And the sources used this specific case just to demonstrate how this post-reality threat works, where reality itself, if it seems even slightly strange, gets met with instant suspicion, dismissed as AI. And that just erodes public trust across the board.
So, according to these sources, the potential problem is, well, existential, the death of easily verifiable real information.
Gone. It's a heavy thought.
Yeah. Given how serious that is, it's critical we look at the solutions the sources discuss. They seem to focus mainly on two things: regulation and provenance. Basically, knowing where content came from.
Right. And the approach they seem to advocate for is what they call light touch regulation. They're pretty clear this isn't about, like, banning the tech. It's more about mandating transparency, mostly through digital signatures.
Okay, digital signatures, how would that work? They get quite specific. They propose every AI-generated piece of media should be digitally watermarked or blockchain stamped, embedding data right into the file, who made it, when in a way that's hard to remove or fake.
And just to clarify, that blockchain stamped part, in simple terms, it's like linking that digital watermark to a secure public record. It permanently logs its origin and history, making it verifiable and really hard to tamper with, like giving AI content an unforgeable digital passport.
Okay, got it. A digital passport. So the sources then argue that platforms, social media, video sites should be required to detect and display these signatures.
Precisely. So that provides audiences, provides you with crucial info. You could see, maybe clearly marked, this content was AI generated by source X on date Y. It helps you assess credibility. It's not about banning unverified stuff.
What about flagging it, making it clear it's unverified?
Yeah, exactly. Unverified content would be treated differently. The sources suggest it would become culturally flagged as suspect. You'd approach it with caution, like you might view an anonymous flyer or an unsigned letter today. The lack of a clear origin becomes its own kind of red flag.
Okay, so taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture here, These sources are absolutely adamant that this VO3 launch isn't just progress, it's that quantum leap again, something that drastically speeds up the timeline for these advanced AI capabilities.
They make an interesting point about how people usually perceive this stuff. We often focus on the current limits of AI, right? The flaws. And that leads us to assume that truly photorealistic, controllable AI video is still decades away, maybe 20, 30 years out.
But the revelation, according to these sources, is that we, the public, only see the tip of the iceberg. They claim multiple companies, many working quietly, not the big names maybe, are already rapidly iterating and have already reached this level of photorealism and control today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their stark conclusion is we're not decades away from full-on accessible AI filmmaking.
Yeah.
The capabilities they describe with VO3 and likely being developed elsewhere mean the tools are already here, available right now, potentially to anyone.
Wow. And the sociopolitical, the creative, the ethical implications of that reality, as they stress throughout these sources, they're just immense, huge.
So it leaves you asking, what does this all mean? If these capabilities really are here today, what does that actually change about how you, listening now, consume media, how you trust information, how you even think about creativity?
Let's quickly recap this deep dive then. We've explored these really honestly astonishing capabilities of VO3, this AI platform that sources say just shatters the uncanny valley, blurs the line with reality itself. We've looked at its potential to cause this, well, existential crisis for traditional media like Hollywood, while at the same time maybe opening up entirely new kinds of micro-entertainment, maybe fostering a whole new class of AI creators.
Right.
And we've definitely wrestled with what the sources identify as maybe the biggest threat, the potential death of real information, the terrifying ease with which reality itself could be faked, undermined in a world full of indistinguishable generated content.
It really forces you to consider how you engage with media from now on. What new habits of scrutiny do you need? Do we need in a world where anything you see, anything you hear could, in theory, just be generated from a prompt?
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world these sources describe and the pretty staggering implications of something like VO3. As you go about your day, here's maybe a final thought drawn right from the challenge these sources raise. If the tools to create hyper-realistic media aren't science fiction anymore, if they're already here, accessible to anyone, what becomes the single most valuable skill in this coming post-reality era? Is it the ability to create compelling content? Or is it the ability to verify what's actually real?